Wow, Election Day. Can you believe it's finally here? We've got these live updates from Today News coming in. And let me tell you, this race between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump is super close, like neck and neck. I'm looking at the numbers right now. And it's given me some serious flashbacks, to all those other nail-biter elections we've seen recently.
Yeah, what's wild is, think about the history behind these two. Kamala Harris is, trying to be the first woman president, and then you've got Trump going for this historic comeback. You really can't get much higher stakes than that, right?
It's like, it's like we're watching a political sequel. But we have no clue how it's going to end. And we're here to break it all down for you. All the big moments, expert takes, and even how the world is reacting to this whole thing.
It's all about connecting the dots, right? Not just who might win, but what it means for everybody.
All right, so let's jump right in. We've got early results from Dixville Notch, New Hampshire, that tiny town that votes at midnight. And get this, it's a tie.
A tie in Dixville Notch. That usually means the national race is going to be close too, and the polls are already saying this one's going to be tight. It's like that whole town is a tiny version of the country right now. Everyone just holding their breath.
Millions have voted early already, but today's the main event. And the tension is, you could just feel it. Even the markets are freaking out a little. U.S. treasuries are down. The dollar is falling. Even Bitcoin ETFs are seeing people pull their money out. I guess everyone's getting a little nervous.
Yeah, that's that classic flight to safety. Investors dumping risky assets like Bitcoin and moving into things like U.S. treasuries. But even those are falling. So, that tells you how on edge people are about the results. Markets hate uncertainty. And this election is uncertainty central.
Okay, so let's talk about the candidates. What are they up to today? Well, Harris is making her final push in Philadelphia. And she brought out the big guns, Lady Gaga and Oprah. Now, that's what I call a power play. It's interesting, though. She's calling herself the underdog, framing this as a rocky fight for victory. Kind of a good analogy, if you ask me.
Yeah. It's smart. By playing the underdog, she gets her base energized, and she might even pull in those undecided voters. The folks who like to root for the unexpected winner.
Meanwhile, Trump's ending with a rally in Michigan. No celebrities for him. He's sticking to his policies. This could be his last campaign ever.
Yeah.
Just adds another layer to this whole thing.
Yeah, it's a very different approach than Harris's. He's going all in on his message, reaching out to those loyal supporters, and hoping to win over those who care more about policy than personality. And yeah, if this is his last hurrah, that could really fire up his base.
And it's kind of cool to see how diverse his support is. Like singer Mary Milben, she's been vocal about supporting Trump.
Right. It just goes to show you, political lines aren't always as clear as we think. There are so many factors at play here. And getting those nuances, that's how we understand how complex this election really is.
Okay, so we've got these two basically tied. And that means those swing states, they're going to be crucial. They could literally decide the whole thing. Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin.
Those are the battlegrounds for sure. Each candidate needs enough of them to hit that magic number, 270 electoral votes. And that's why we see so much action in those specific states.
And then there's Florida, of course. Always a nail-biter. The Secretary of State there actually thinks we'll have results by bedtime. Crazy, right? Over 8 million Floridians have already voted, either early or by mail. So we might have a good idea of what's happening there pretty early on.
Florida, man. Always a close one. And they often end up reflecting the national result, too. It's such a diverse state. And how they vote usually gives us a hint about how the rest of the country might swing.
Now, we like to keep things fun here. So, got to talk about Elon Musk for a second. He's been doing this $1 million a day giveaway to voters thing. And a Pennsylvania judge actually let it continue, even with all the legal challenges. Talk about adding fuel to the fire.
It's an interesting situation. Makes you think about the role of money and power in elections, right? Musk's getting a lot of attention with this. And maybe swaying some voters. But it also brings up those questions about ethics. Is this really how we want to do things?
And just to add to the suspense, Harris's campaign is saying it could take days to get a final result. They're blaming it on the close races and how different states count votes.
Yeah, that just throws more uncertainty into the mix, and it means we're more likely to see recounts and legal challenges, especially if the results are super tight.
And speaking of potential delays, There are over 4,000 challenged mail-in ballot applications in Pennsylvania. That's raising some red flags for sure. Some people think it points to voter eligibility problems and maybe even more delays in getting that final count.
Yeah, those challenges, they really bring up those debates about voting rights and election security, especially in an election this close. We need a system that's fair and transparent.
Absolutely. So let's see what the rest of the world is saying about all this. Over in India, Harris actually has some family ties, and her ancestral village, Gulasendrapuram, is going all out. They're holding prayers and making those traditional kolam designs for her victory. Pretty heartwarming to see that kind of connection, right?
Yeah, you can really feel the global reach of this election. It's more than just politics. There are all these personal stories woven in. And clearly, Harris's candidacy has touched people all over the world. The support from her ancestral village is a beautiful example of that.
But, in contrast to that, we're also hearing some more cautious analysis from India's Minister of External Affairs, S. Jaishankar. He's predicting that U.S.-India relations will continue to grow no matter who wins. He even pointed to steady progress over the last 5 presidencies, almost like he's saying the overall direction won't change much.
Yeah, it's a very pragmatic view of things. I mean, there will be some differences depending on who wins, but the big picture, the relationship between the U.S. and India, that's likely to stay pretty stable. There are just too many shared interests between the two countries.
So what about those global markets, specifically the Japanese yen? Experts are saying a Harris win could make it stronger, while a Trump win might make it drop. And then, of course, there's the whole contested election thing, which just throws a wrench into everything.
It's a great example of how connected everything is, right? Global markets are reacting to what's happening politically in one country, all this uncertainty. It's making investors hedge their bets, and the yen is just one example of that.
Okay, let's talk about potential threats to the election itself. U.S. intelligence is warning about Russian disinformation campaigns, trying to undermine confidence in the process. And they're also flagging Iran as a potential threat.
Yeah, it really shows you the challenges of protecting elections these days, especially in the digital age. Foreign interference is a serious issue. Authorities have to be on top of it, fighting disinformation, making sure the voting process is secure.
And what about the impact of a second Trump term on specific sectors, like the Indian IT industry? His first term saw those restrictions on H-1B visas, which really hit Indian companies hard. But they've been adapting since then, relying less on those visas. Maybe that'll protect them this time around.
Interesting point. Global industries are always evolving, and even if those H-1B restrictions come back under a second Trump term, Indian IT companies have changed how they operate. They're more diverse now, maybe less vulnerable than before.
All right, before we move on, let's get those key dates on our calendars. For the official election process, Electoral College votes on December 17th, Congress counts and confirms the votes on January 6th, and then the new president is sworn in on January 21st.
Big dates, all of them. The milestones in the transfer of power. The roadmap for what happens after the election. It's a process. It takes time.
Phew. We've covered a lot. And I can already tell this is going to be a long night. The race is too close to call. The whole world is watching. And there's a real chance of delays and recounts. What about you? You on the edge of your seat, too?
Definitely. But here's the thing to remember. Everyone's focused on who wins tonight. But the impact of this election, that goes way beyond the U.S. This will shape global politics, the economy, even our own lives for years to come.
That's a really important point. This is so much bigger than just one night. This is about the future.
Exactly. It's up to all of us to stay informed, engaged, and ready to help shape that future. It's amazing to think about it. This whole election is happening, and in the background, there's all this global uncertainty, the war in Ukraine, economic worries, climate change. That's always looming. And whoever wins, the U.S. president, their decisions, those decisions are going to impact all of that big time.
You're totally right. It's not just about what happens here in the U.S. It's about global leadership, too. Who projects the image the world needs right now? I mean, think about it. What kind of message does each candidate send to our allies and to those who aren't so friendly?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I bet a lot of world leaders are asking themselves that right now. Harris, she's got that experience as vice president, and she's big on diplomacy. Some might see her as a safe choice, someone stable. But others might worry, is she really ready to handle those big global crises? Has she been tested enough?
And then there's Trump. He's unpredictable, confrontational even. Some might see that as strength, decisive. But others, they might worry about, instability, things escalating.
It's a tough call. Every country has its own priorities, its own point of view. Some might want the U.S. to be more assertive on the world stage. Others might prefer someone who's more collaborative, more of a team player.
It's like everyone's trying to figure out the next chess move. What's each candidate going to do on that global board?
Exactly. And those moves, they'll have consequences, that's for sure. And not just for the U.S.
So let's switch gears a bit. One thing that keeps popping up in these live updates is disinformation. Especially with those warnings about Russia interfering. It feels like a real threat. Like it could really mess with the integrity of the election.
Oh, absolutely. Disinformation, it's a powerful weapon these days. Especially in our digital world, it creates doubt, erodes trust in institutions, and it can even influence how people vote. It's like a virus spreading through social media, infecting people's minds with these fake narratives.
Yeah, and it's everywhere. It feels almost impossible to escape. Everyone's got an agenda, and it's so hard to know what's true anymore.
That's why we got to be smarter. Sharpen those critical thinking skills, be aware of our own biases, really look at where our information is coming from, and be suspicious of anything that seems too good to be true, or anything that's just designed to push our buttons, get us all riled up.
It's like we all need to become detectives, right? Looking for clues, trying to figure out if there's a hidden agenda, or if a story is just made up.
That's a great way to put it. It's not just about protecting ourselves, it's about protecting our whole democracy.
So what can we do? How do we fight back against this tidal wave of disinformation?
Well, the first thing is to recognize it. We have to educate ourselves and each other about how disinformation works, the tactics they use. We also need to support those fact-checking organizations, the ones that are out there debunking those false stories.
And we can all be more responsible online. Think before you share. Make sure it's from a credible source. And don't be afraid to question something if it seems off.
Exactly. We need a culture of critical thinking, healthy skepticism. We need to be watchful, yes, but we also need to be discerning. We can't fall into that trap of only looking for information that confirms what we already believe. Confirmation bias.
Yeah, it's a balancing act for sure. But a crucial one if we want a healthy democracy. And speaking of which, there's been a lot of talk about recounts and legal challenges in this election. Given how close it is, it seems likely, right?
Oh, definitely a possibility. And if that happens, this whole thing could drag on for weeks, maybe even months.
Oh, man, I hope not. Nobody wants a repeat of 2000, right? Remember, hanging chads.
Yeah.
Legal battles that just wouldn't end. The whole country on edge for weeks.
It shows us that sometimes elections don't have a neat and tidy ending. We have processes in place to make sure the count is fair and accurate, but those processes, they can be slow, and they can cause a lot of friction.
And you know what else is a concern? Civil unrest.
Yeah.
If one side feels like the election was rigged or unfair, with everything that's been going on, all the division, it's a real worry.
It is a legitimate concern. A contested election could make those divisions even worse. Tensions are high, that's for sure. But it's also a time to stay calm, to think things through. We have to remember, democracy is a process, and that process takes patience, respect for the rule of law, and a willingness to accept the outcome, even if it's not the one we wanted.
Yeah, that's important. It's so easy to get caught up in the emotion of it all. But our democracy is bigger than any one candidate or any one election.
Absolutely, and it's on all of us to protect it, to keep it strong.
Okay, let's talk economy. Things have been rough lately, right? Inflation, supply chains all messed up. It's been a roller coaster.
The economy, it's always a big deal in elections. People want to know how their wallets are going to be affected. And each candidate had their own ideas about how to handle it.
Harris, she's focused on investing in things like renewable energy, education, and healthcare. She's also promising to cut taxes for the middle class.
Yeah, she's pushing for a bigger role for the government, more social programs, infrastructure spending, that kind of thing.
Trump, on the other hand, he's all about deregulation, tax cuts.
Yeah.
And he's taking a hard line on trade deals.
He's definitely more of a free market guy. He thinks less government intervention will lead to more economic growth.
So it's that classic ideological battle, right? Big government versus small government. Intervention versus letting the market do its thing. It's a debate that never seems to go away.
And each side has its pluses and minuses. In the end, it's the voters who decide what path they want to take, what they think will lead to a stronger economy.
And we can't forget about the global situation either. The war in Ukraine, the energy crisis in Europe, and all those trade tensions with China.
Yeah, it's all connected, isn't it? And whatever the U.S. president decides, it's going to have an impact on the rest of the world.
It's a lot to process, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But I guess that's why we do this show, right? These deep dives. to help people understand the bigger picture so they can make informed decisions.
Exactly. Give people knowledge, insights, help them navigate this crazy, complicated world.
Speaking of knowledge, let's talk about education. That's always a hot topic in U.S. politics.
Oh yeah, education. Always a debate about it. Funding, curriculum, what role the government should play, and this election is no different.
Harris has put out plans for universal pre-K tuition-free college and more money for public schools.
Right. She's putting a lot of emphasis on early childhood education and making sure everyone has access to college.
Trump, though, he's more about school choice, charter schools, and less government involvement in education overall.
He's more into a market-based approach. Thinks competition and parental choice will lead to better results.
So we see that clash again, big government versus small government, traditional public schools versus charter schools. It's a familiar theme this time around.
And as always, both sides have their pros and cons. It comes down to what voters think is best for their kids, what they believe will create the best education system.
And we can't forget about the pandemic either, the way it's affected education. Kids falling behind, mental health problems, the achievement gap getting even wider.
Absolutely. The pandemic, it really exposed the cracks in the system, all those inequalities, and it made it clear that we need new solutions.
It's a big topic, education, a lot to unpack. But it's so important, it's the foundation of everything, a strong society,
Couldn't agree more. It's an investment in the future, something we need to take seriously as a country.
Speaking of things we need to take seriously, healthcare. It's always a big one in elections, and this one's no different.
Oh, healthcare in the U.S., that's a whole other conversation. Complicated, controversial. We debate about affordability, access, the government's role. It's always in the headlines.
Harris is pushing for Medicare for all, a single-payer system where the government covers everyone.
Right. That's what a lot of other developed countries do, and it's been talked about in the U.S. for years.
Trump, though, he wants to get rid of Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act.
Yeah, he's more in favor of a free market approach. He thinks competition and consumer choice will bring prices down and improve quality.
So it's another one of those big divides, right? Government-run healthcare versus private healthcare. Single-payer versus multi-payer.
And each approach has its potential strengths and weaknesses. Voters have to weigh those options and decide what system they think will work best for them.
And let's not forget about COVID. The pandemic is still having an impact on healthcare. Hospitals are stretched thin. Healthcare workers are burnt out. And it really showed us how important it is to be prepared for public health crises.
Yeah, the pandemic was a wake-up call. It showed us how fragile things are and how much we need to invest in public health.
There's a lot to think about with healthcare, but it's a basic right, isn't it? Access to care no matter what. And we need to figure out how to make that a reality for everyone.
Absolutely. Everyone deserves quality healthcare, affordable healthcare, no matter how much they make or where they come from.
All right, last topic for this whirlwind deep dive. Climate change. It's a global problem. And what the U.S. president does will have a big impact, for better or worse.
It's not a problem for the future anymore. It's happening now. Climate change, we see it everywhere. Extreme weather, rising sea levels, ecosystems changing. And the science is clear. Humans are causing it, and we have to do something about it.
Harris, she's made climate change a big part of her campaign. She's proposing a Green New Deal, investing in renewable energy, creating green jobs, and getting the U.S. to a point where it's not putting any more carbon into the atmosphere.
It's an ambitious plan, but she sees climate change as an existential threat, something that needs urgent action.
Trump, though, he's been downplaying the threat, and he's rolled back environmental regulations.
He's not as convinced about the science, and he's made economic growth more of a priority than the environment.
So another big difference, right? Taking action on climate versus denying it's a problem. Green energy versus fossil fuels. It's a debate that's happening all over the world.
And it matters what the U.S. does a lot. It's one of the biggest emitters of greenhouse gases, so its decisions will affect everyone's efforts to deal with climate change.
It's a lot to consider. Climate change is a huge challenge, and we have to face it head on with urgency and seriousness.
Absolutely. We have to protect our planet for ourselves, for future generations, so everyone has a sustainable future.
Wow. This deep dive has been intense. We've gone from the latest election results to those big fundamental issues that are at stake. It's been a wild ride.
It has been quite a journey, and it's not over yet. The outcome of this election is going to have a big impact on the U.S., on the world, and we'll be here to break it all down for you.
So what's next? What should we be watching for in the coming hours and days?
We'll keep an eye on those vote counts, see if there are any recounts or legal challenges. And of course, watch how both sides react. It's only just begun. It's kind of wild, isn't it? How this U.S. election is like a worldwide event. I mean, it really shows you how much influence the U.S. has, what happens here. It affects everyone, no matter where you live.
Yeah, it feels like the whole planet's holding its breath.
Yeah.
It's waiting to see what the U.S. is going to do and how it's going to impact them. It's like everyone's got a personal stake in this thing.
You're right. It's not just like governments watching this. It's everyday people all over the world. They're connecting with this election on a personal level, worried about the economy maybe, climate change, or just hoping for a world that's, more fair.
Like this election's become this mirror, reflecting all our hopes and fears.
Exactly. And what happens tonight? It won't just shape the next 4 years. It could shape the next few decades. The U.S. is a global superpower. So its choices, they have a domino effect.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you want our listeners to remember? What's the big takeaway?
I think it's this. Elections are super important, but they're not the end of the story. Not for democracy. The real work. It starts after the votes are counted. Talking to each other, holding our leaders accountable, working together to build a better future, no matter who wins.
That's a great point. It's not about winning or losing. It's how we move forward. As a country and as a global community, we all have a role to play.
Exactly. We need people to be involved, to think critically, and to be committed to those values, the things that make a democracy work. That's what shapes the future, not just one election.
Well said. So, to everyone listening out there, stay engaged, stay informed, and most importantly, stay hopeful. We're all in this together. We all have a voice.
And remember, the world is watching. But even more than that, the world is listening. So make your voice heard, not just by voting, but by what you do, by how you commit to making things better.
Couldn't have said it better myself. This has been an incredible deep dive, and I hope everyone listening is feeling fired up, ready to get involved. We'll be back soon to break down all the latest. But until then, keep those minds sharp and those hearts open.
And never stop questioning, exploring, engaging with the world around you. That's how democracy thrives.